Hi gang, the Salamanders chapter stands as a beacon of unwavering resolve within the Warhammer 40,000 universe, renowned for their mastery of fire and forge, their craftsmanship, and their deep connection to the people of the Imperium whom they protect. Something depressingly rare for the Space Marines of 40k.
Did I mention we have merch? Stay tuned at the end to find out more.
The Salamanders are one of the most famed Space Marine chapters of the 41st millennium. Born from the tumultuous volcanic world of Nocturne, the Salamanders are the inheritors of their Primarch Vulkan's fiery legacy, embodying his tenets of self-reliance, personal trial, and stoic defense of the Imperium. Salamanders see themselves as craftsmen, shaping the future through their conflict, their terrifying appearance belying a noble and protective nature, at least for Warhammer 40k. Since their earliest days as one of the original legions of the first founding, they've endured the galaxy's darkest hours, including betrayal during the Horus Heresy, emerging from near extinction as famed champions of humanity. And since then, their blend of close-range firepower, careful and wise strategic guidance, and exceptional craftsmanship ensures that they fall like their preferred hammers on the Emperor's foes, always mindful of the collateral damage they might cause and deeply rooted in the traditions taught by their lost Primarch. Something that many other chapters could do well to emulate. The history of the Salamanders chapter is deeply entwined with the saga of the Great Crusade, the story of the Horus Heresy, and the enduring legacy of their Primarch. The Salamanders began as the 18th Legion of the first founding, created on Terra by the Emperor of Mankind at the dawn of his stellar empire during the Unification Wars. In fact, they were something of a rarity even then. For reasons unknown, the Emperor separated 3 of his legions from the other 17, a grouping that's often designated the Trefoil. The 6th Legion and the 20th Legion were both known to have separate and particularly specialist missions from the start, but it'd be a long time before the unique reason for the 18th Legion's separation would become known. Even so, the Legion was created later and smaller than many of the others, and fought on Terra in those wars. In the early days, the warriors of the 18th were known for their stoicism and indomitable spirit. When the Great Crusade began and the war left Terra for the darkness of the void, they were instrumental in reclaiming worlds for the nascent Imperium. But though they still numbered many thousands of Astartes, they counted themselves amongst the smaller of the Emperor's legions, and to balance this out, they often engaged in asymmetric warfare, drawing enemies into situations where their numerical disadvantage was negated. Their doctrines favoured a resolute, fight-to-the-bitter-end approach, a trait that cemented their reputation for uncompromising dedication, but could often lead to heavy, costly losses and a certain fatality, a grim sense that they would inevitably continue to do their duty until they all died, something that would eventually be tempered when they rediscovered their Primarch. Vulkan was one of the 20 Primarchs created by the Emperor of Mankind and then scattered to the 4 corners of the galaxy during a warp breach in his lab complex far under the Himalayan mountains. The pod containing the infant Vulkan arrived on the harsh and rocky world of Nocturne during a time of trial, a period of intense gravitational upheaval caused by the proximity of Nocturne's giant moon, Prometheus, when the ground heaved and split and lava boiled up to the surface. He was found and raised by a blacksmith named Bell, who became his adoptive father. Nocturne was dangerous, a harsh volcanic death world, characterized by ferocious volcanic activity, high levels of natural radiation, and populated by monstrous saurian life forms, but it had a human population, and the young Primarch grew amongst them at an astounding rate, becoming stronger, bigger, and learning from his father, eventually becoming the greatest blacksmith and quickest mind in Hesiod, his hometown. all within just 3 years of his discovery. He even discovered and began teaching to the other blacksmiths advanced forging techniques, such was his innate affinity for the craft. However, Nocturne, like many human worlds in the Age of Strife, was frequently raided by Xenos forces, in this case, piratical Eldar from the dark realm of Camorra. Its people had developed hiding places to survive the raid. However, in Vulkan's 4th year, he refused to hide, and he inspired his townspeople to stand with him. Leading the defense, he personally killed 100 of the raiders and then drove them back to the webway, inspiring the leaders of Nocturne's 7 largest settlements to swear never to hide from the Xenos again. To celebrate the great victory, a tournament was held, but near the end of the festivities, an unexpected stranger of pale complexion and outlandish clothing arrived and challenged Vulkan, wagering that the loser should serve the victor. The contest they embarked on lasted 8 days, encompassed feats of intellect, strength, craftsmanship, and endurance, but on the final day, the scores were still tied. The last event required them to construct a weapon and hunt the largest salamander they could find in the dangerous peaks overlooking the town. Vulkan found and killed a large fire drake, one of the oldest and deadliest of the monsters, but on his return, the volcano he was on erupted, sending him over a cliff. Vulkan struggled, hanging precariously by one hand and clutching on to his prize's tail. And then the stranger arrived, carrying an even larger drake, but seeing Vulkan's distress, he tossed his own drake into a lava flow to create a bridge, saving Vulkan's life. Though Vulkan was declared the victor, he was the only one who returned with a drake, he knelt before the stranger, stating that anyone who valued life over pride was worthy of his service. And of course, at that moment, the stranger revealed himself to be the Emperor of Mankind, thus reuniting Vulkan with the Imperium. Vulkan remained with the Emperor for a few years, receiving tutelage and fighting alongside his new father before being officially reunited with his legion, and that reunion occurred at a critical juncture. The 18th Legion was making a last stand against a massive orc horde on the dead world of Antium, buying time for civilians to flee. Vulkan arrived with 3,000 newly forged reinforcements from Nocturne, striking the orcs like a hammer to his legion's anvil, breaking and wiping them out. At the time, Vulkan was deeply moved by his son's selflessness and their refusal to yield, which had saved countless lives, and he vowed to serve them as much as they served him. Upon their reunion, Vulkan recognized that fatalistic streak in his legion that needed reshaping. He tempered their costly, sometimes rash engagements with a stoicism and patience, building them into a stronger, more formidable force. His adopted homeworld of Nocturne became theirs, and in his honor, the Legion was renamed the Salamanders, adopting the stylized skull of the large beast he felled as their chapter icon. Vulkan himself was renowned as a great hero of the early Imperium, known for his empathy towards average humans, his craftsmanship at the forge, both in function and in artistry, and his technological prowess. He constructed a great many artifacts and unique weapon systems during the Crusade, and he was responsible for recovering and reviving the Saturnine pattern of Terminator armor and the Saturnine pattern Dreadnought armor, designs he then shared with all the Space Marine legions. He was a huge figure, clad in emerald green plate and Drake scale armor, one of the largest and physically strongest of all the Primarchs, capable of overturning Space Marine battle tanks with his bare hands. While he was never the most gregarious of the Primarchs, he was considered a great friend by many of his brothers, though it was said that his strength was so great that during sparring he deliberately held back to avoid harming them. The Salamanders fought as important contingents of many expeditionary fleets during the Great Crusade, liberating worlds and fighting alongside other legionnaires Astartes and the Imperial army. Their dedication to the Emperor's vision and their civil treatment of defeated human populations were notable, often putting them at odds with more ruthless legions. This compassionate policy was exemplified during the reconquest of Karatan, where Vulkan clashed with comrade Kurz of the Night Lords over his brutal tactics, especially after Kurz's legion killed an entire city's inhabitants to sow fear, a confrontation that deeply affected Vulkan in the years to come. And here's a good point to say that if you want to find out more about the Great Crusade exploits of the 18th Legion, I have a video just here that tells you all about that. The Emperor's vision of a united galaxy was, of course, shattered by the Horus Heresy. When Horus broke faith, Vulkan's Salamanders were a part of the first reprisal fleet, sent to bring the War Master to justice. Vulkan urged restraint and fleet cohesion, but his wisdom was ignored by Ferrus Manus, who had overall command. Along with his Iron Hands and the Raven Guard, the Salamanders formed the first wave of attack on Istvan V, unknowingly entering into a trap. They were mercilessly bombarded by the traitors while trying to secure a beachhead in the Urgal Depression before 4 other legions in the second wave revealed their treachery and unleashed their own firepower. Caught between 8 traitor legions, the Salamanders and their allies were almost wiped out in what became known as the Drop Site Massacre. The survival of any loyalist Astartes from Istvan V was miraculous. Vulkan found himself surrounded by hundreds of Iron Warriors and Night Lords fighting to what he believed was his death, but his true nature and the possible reason for his legion's membership of that trefoil was to be revealed soon after. Vulkan was taken prisoner by Comrade Kurz, Primarch of the Night Lords, who spent months trying to break Vulkan's spirit and kill him. But this proved impossible as, like the Emperor, Vulkan was a perpetual, an immortal human. Kurz subjected Vulkan to horrific torments, repeatedly beheading him, dismembering him, eviscerating him, shooting him at close range, even exposing him to the void. And each time, Vulkan's body would regenerate completely, much to Kurz's fury. After months of this, Vulkan would eventually escape his confinement, teleporting into space above the Ultramarines planet of Macragge, but his torturous journey wouldn't end there. The Primarch himself was mentally broken, violent and incoherent, and he died again during a convoluted battle soon after. Placed in a stasis capsule, the few Salamanders who'd made it to Macragge led an expedition to return Vulkan's body to Nocturne, where he was finally restored during an ordeal on Mount Deathfire. His actions for the rest of the conflict were limited. The Salamanders fought as part of the Shattered Legions, harrying Horus's forces as they travelled towards Terra, and Vulkan himself made it back, stationed by the Golden Throne as its last guardian and fighting his brother Magnus in the Webway. But it wasn't until the days of the Scouring that the Salamanders would be reorganised and fight together once again. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Salamanders' Legion was severely depleted, with only a few hundred survivors. During the Great Scouring, the wave of vengeance that followed Horus's defeat, the Salamanders took part in relatively few actions due to those depleted numbers. However, Vulkan was particularly enraged by the horrors inflicted upon Terra's population by the Emperor's Children Legion, particularly the actions of the infamous apothecary-turned-gene torturer Fabius Bile, who had harvested the people for stimulants and drugs. Vulkan vowed to bring Bile to justice, and the Salamander's fleet chased Bile's ship across the galaxy, eventually catching up with him on Arden 9, but Bile once again escaped their clutches, his ship disappearing into a vortex of sickly light, leaving a tear in reality. Vulkan ordered the local area searched for any fragments that could lead to Bile, but it was to no avail, and sometime after that, Vulkan chose to leave the Salamanders, claiming he would return in the end times at their moment of greatest need. Vulkan did reappear again. During the War of the Beast, 1500 years later, he single-handedly defended the Imperial world of Caldera from a massive Orc invasion, briefly returned to Terra and took command of the Imperium, and then led a crusade to Ullanor, the Beast's homeworld, where he confronted the Beast and killed the Orc war leader in a massive explosion, and once again he disappeared. Presumed dead, but the Salamanders still hunt for him in the 41st millennium, believing he'll one day return as he promised. Since then, the Salamanders have continued to operate as one of the many chapters of Adeptus Astartes stationed around the galaxy. Vulkan was an enthusiastic supporter of Guilliman's reforms that broke up the old legions, and it was relatively simple to rechristen the Salamanders' Legion as a chapter owing to their massive losses. Little more than 1,000 of them remained. They were the only loyalist legion reformed into a chapter who did not create any successors during the second founding, though successor chapters have been created from their line in other foundings since then. When the Salamanders describe themselves as Fireborn, it speaks not only to their culture and origins, but also to the profound influence of their volcanic homeworld, Nocturne, which has shaped the chapter over the millennia. Nocturne is a world aflame, a cauldron of fiery tempests, strung with millions of interlinked volcanoes. Its surface is rugged and mountainous, as malleable and ever-changing a landscape as could be, scarred by lava channels and bubbling calderas. It's a planet of dark mountains, black sand plains, and sulphurous seas. The planet is in fact so volcanically active that it's said it never experiences true darkness. As it rotates away from its star, volcanic eruptions, molten ejecta, and jets of burning gas illuminate radioactive ash clouds and light up the night sky. Nocturne also exhibits high levels of natural radiation. While the origin of this radiation is unknown, its interaction with the people of the planet is quite notable, and it's sometimes referred to by Salamanders apothecaries as the furnace invisible. Nocturne is officially classified as a death world, not just for its inimical conditions, but also for the monstrous predators that stalk its flatlands and haunt its depths. Most infamous amongst these are giant reptilian beasts, Nocturne's original salamanders, that claim all the highest ridges. These are the beasts that the chapter took its name from and adopted as its icon. However, despite all that, Nocturne itself presents an even greater test for its inhabitants, the time of trial. This period occurs once every Nocturnian year, which is 15 Terran years, when Nocturne and its massive, oversized moon, Prometheus, share a complex and esoteric orbit that brings them so close, the gravitic battle threatens to tear Nocturne apart. During this global cataclysm, seismic ruptures tear through the land masses, immense thunderheads boil in the skies, and lightning ravages the plains, creating pools of black glass. The planet's radiation fluctuates rapidly, becoming deadly even to its acclimatized native people, and thousands of the volcanoes erupt in concert. The Salamanders view this devastation as a trial for both the planet and themselves, believing their world emerges stronger after each cycle, cooling in the void as Prometheus finally retreats. And despite the devastation, the time of trial brings significant benefits. New veins of ore and minerals are revealed, and the world's meager soils are enriched with nutrients. Many Nocturnians rely on the time of trial for survival. Miners access fresh materials, while metal workers and jewelsmiths craft precious objects from newfound seams. The Adeptus Mechanicus is known to pay handsomely for these rare deposits, making trade contacts with the Salamanders viciously contested by nearby forge worlds. The people of Nocturne are incredibly hardy, accustomed to surviving the high radiation and the monstrous saurian life forms. Their culture and values were instilled in Vulkan during his youth and, in turn, passed down to his legion. And to this day, the Salamanders and their human cohabitants consider themselves two parts of a single people, linked by ties of blood, adversity, and endurance. This close bond explains why the Salamanders hold many human values in high esteem, certainly more than other Space Marines who tend to have distanced themselves from those or forgotten what they were. The ancient shaman of the people of Nocturne long ago discovered islands of stability that could withstand the time of trials. These sacred geological areas allowed for the establishment of 7 large settlements known as sanctuary cities, originally used as tribal meeting points, scattered bastions that sheltered the populace. The sanctuary cities include Epimethus, Themis, Heliosa, Skarok, Clymene, and Hesiod, Vulkan's hometown, plus one other that hasn't been detailed yet and we don't know the name of. In time, these meeting points became fortified cities protected by rocky walls and finely crafted gates, now ringed with void shields to protect them from the planet's harsh environment. Unlike many chapters, the Salamanders do not remain aloof from their homeworld's human population. When not at war or engaged in training and rituals, most Salamander warriors live amongst the people of Nocturne. The Space Marines act as elders in the sanctuary cities, providing guidance and wisdom and mentoring prospective novitiates. Mindful of Vulkan's compassion, they see this leadership as an extension of their duties to the Imperium, learning humility and understanding by living amongst and shepherding their people. Within each of the sanctuary cities, the chapter maintains a chapter bastion, a smaller version of a full fortress monastery, with its own gymnasia, reclusiam, meditation cells and other facilities to support the aspirants that train there and garrisoned members of the chapter that are assigned to the homeworld. Beneath each is a forge and a great central anvil where the Salamanders can practice their craft, and at the top, a vault of remembrance, a finely carved chamber in which rites of remembrance are carried out for lost battle brothers. Outside the sanctuary cities, the planet's divided into 9 settled realms, mostly inhabited by transient nomads who travel between the peaks and mountains in search of ore seams, but the spiritual center of the planet is the famed Mount Deathfire, the largest volcano on Nocturne and a sacred place to its people. Mount Deathfire is home to the largest salamander reptiles, known as fire drakes. It was here that Vulkan had his legendary contest with the Emperor, and underneath it, carved by the legendary master of the forge Karl under the tuition of Vulkan, is the Imperium, a vast chamber of volcanic rock where the bodies of slain Salamanders' marines are returned to the fire of the world. Although Nocturne is the Salamanders' home planet, the chapter's actual fortress monastery is based on Prometheus. Prometheus is denser and far less vulnerable to the time of trial than its malleable parent world, making it an ideal stronghold. It's also airless and void of native inhabitants. Prometheus serves as the home to the Salamanders' chapter command and their well-stocked armory, along with extensive bastions, weapon arrays, and astropathic spires. The fortress monastery is a sprawling and impregnable edifice. Below ground, miles of hallways and sconce-lit chambers echo with the steps of ceramite boots, where chapter serfs and bondsmen, uniquely adapted native Nocturnians, endure the artificially high temperatures within. Many private cells and forbidden courts within the monastery are reserved solely for the Marines, serving as places of meditation or private ceremony, barely lit by the ruddy glow of braziers with oppressively hot atmospheres. Orbital docks and repair stations surround the monastery, harbouring the chapter's fleet of strike cruisers and battle barges. The jewels of this are two legendary artifacts created by Vulkan himself, the forge ship Chalice of Fire and the defense laser known as the Eye of Vulkan. The Chalice of Fire is a massive manufacturing vessel that produces many of the Salamanders' unique pieces of technology, viewed with envy and acquisitive intent by the Adeptus Mechanicus, and in contrast, the Eye of Vulkan is an immense destructive laser array, utilising barely understood power sources and lensing that's now beyond replication by the Masters of the Forge. Finally, at the centre of the fortress is the Salamanders' Armoury, located miles deep within the bedrock of the moon. This is the domain of their tech marines, and it's a labyrinth of cells, alcoves, voids, and cramped networks of superheated techno-arcana, dangerous and claustrophobic even for specially adapted servitors that maintain it. Within those chambers, the tech marines maintain the chapter's machinery. While the tech marines themselves are not particularly more numerous than in other chapters, their efforts are regularly supported by other battle brothers, as many Salamanders warriors maintain a personal anvil and their own tools for repairing and embellishing their own war gear. This allows the tech marines to focus on larger war machines and the creation of advanced technological artifacts. Their armory is commanded by a triumvirate of Masters of the Forge, who direct the issuing of vehicles and artillery to all the different strike forces. The collective body of belief and wisdom by which the Salamanders live is known as the Promethean Cult, set down by Vulkan around the time of the Horus Heresy. The Promethean Cult's teachings are preserved in various forms, including allegorical stories of the Emperor and Vulkan, tales of the Primarch's deeds, and ancient wisdom set down by chapter luminaries, and it emphasises self-reliance, loyalty, duty, patience, self-discipline, and above all, endurance. Central to this cult is the symbolic role of fire, viewed as both a creator and a destroyer. Fire is seen as a means of purification and renewal, a belief passed down from Vulkan himself. Aspirants learning the ways of the Salamanders must toil in the forge, learning the art of the hammer, another item of deep spiritual significance. Each Salamander is taught to craft and maintain their own arms and armour, which is seen as fostering patience and determination. Warriors of the chapter are expected to refine those skills as artisans throughout their service, studying the ways of the smith, of fire and earth. Salamander's equipment is thus commonly maintained and ornamented to an incredibly high standard. The Promethean Cult also places great emphasis on the forging of oneself. Implacable determination and endurance are paramount virtues. The chapter's chaplains teach that no objective worth obtaining is easily taken, and that hardship and adversity are inevitable ingredients in a warrior's life. Standing one's ground no matter the odds, advancing into the fiercest engagements, and weathering the tempest are held up as virtues that all Salamanders should embody. Trials of mind and of body are frequent and recurring themes in Nocturnian culture, and that includes ritualistic practices like branding, scarring, and trials by fire, which further enhance their renowned resistance to heat. Amongst the sacred objects and writings of the Promethean Cult, few are as important as the Tome of Fire. This isn't merely a single book, but an enormous archive of diverse objects shaped by Vulkan's peerless craftsmanship. The collection includes written works such as books made of compressed drakeskin, scrolls of sheet metal fine as silk, and ancient data slates displaying unknown runes. The Salamanders refer to all these items as texts of the tome, believing Each contains messages and hidden writings, even when there's no script visible. The chapter's Forge Father is entrusted with the responsibility of those items. His primary task is to search within the tome for clues regarding the location of the 9 artifacts of Vulkan, 4 of which still remain lost across the galaxy. 2 of them, the Eye of Vulkan and the Chalice of Fire, are the defense laser and forge ship that are stationed at the monastery on Prometheus. The Spear of Vulkan, the Gauntlet of the Forge, and Kazari's Mantle, a Drakescale cloak, are all items that have been found and are currently carried by the Forge Father as he goes on his quest. And the Engine of Woes, the Obsidian Chariot, the Unbound Flame, and the Song of Entropy are all as yet undiscovered, waiting to be found by a future Forge Father. Each succeeding Forge Father examines these texts anew, seeking patterns in new arrangements or from untried angles, knowing that Vulkan had the power to craft objects that would react only in specific places or at certain junctures. Thus, an object on an undisturbed shelf might activate and reveal its secrets only when the correct alignment occurs. The chapter believes that when all 9 artifacts are gathered together, Vulkan will return. As a first founding chapter, the Salamander's gene seed originated from one of the original 20 lines created by the Emperor. However, the unique environmental conditions of Nocturne have a profound and specific interaction with this genetic heritage. The erratic gravitational and radioactive forces of Nocturne are thought to have subtly reshaped the Legion's gene seed in strange ways. This interaction manifests most visibly in the Salamander's physical characteristics. The warriors of the chapter are exceptionally large, physically imposing, and powerfully built, often seen as a direct inheritance from Vulkan. Their skin is charcoal black, and their eyes are a strikingly similar shade except for the centers, which are red and glow like lit coals. This menacing appearance can be unsettling even to hardened warriors, but despite facing the occasional denunciation due to their obvious mutation, the Salamanders have never shied away from their heritage or hidden their features, seeing them as a reflection of the physical attributes of noble Vulkan. And while this demonic appearance, ebon skin and glowing red eyes, often stands in stark contrast to their demeanour, the chapter has pragmatically learned to wield it as a tool anyway, terrifying more than one nascent rebellion into submission without resorting to any actual violence, simply by an unhelmed salamander advancing on conspiring ringleaders. Also notable is their resistance to heat and fire, which enables them to stride through roaring infernos, endure ritualistic carrying of red-hot metal, or walk barefoot upon burning coals. A more subtle, yet crucial inheritance from Vulkan's genetic legacy is the Salamander's visual sensitivity to infrared emissions, which they call firesight. This trait develops in novitiates, and it's considered a gift from the Primarch. It's narrowly focused towards very particular heat signatures, so the Marines still use the far superior power armor auto-senses and auspexes in battle, but firesight has been developed to serve a practical chapter-specific purpose. Millennia ago, the Salamanders perfected a material that generates minute heat pulses at these specific detectable signatures. This material is layered into the dermis of their ceramite, woven into robes and standards, and applied to weapon casings and tanks, and when connected to power, it generates enough heat to be seen by salamanders but remain invisible to outsiders. To outsiders, their war gear is beautifully crafted, but to the salamanders, it's much more, a system of luminous iconography, allowing for sub-levels of strategic designation or hidden tactical markings. As a chapter, the salamanders are renowned for their careful, considered approach to warfare, and once they're committed to a cause, their wisdom and determination are unwavering. They're characterized as neither quick to anger nor prone to sow destruction without due judgment. However, once they commit to battle, their wrath becomes unstoppable. Their tactical doctrines heavily emphasize the application of overwhelming close-ranged firepower. They excel in short-range firefights, where the reek of Prometheum accompanies the destruction of even the fiercest enemies. Their expertise with flame and melter weapons is unsurpassed and rightly feared through the galaxy, and they also make extensive use of thunder hammers, a symbol of the Forge. This allows them to be particularly effective against enemy fortifications and defences, often reducing the most dug-in adversaries to cinders. As you might expect, the Salamanders possess one of the most advanced armories in the Imperium, capable of maintaining the full suite of Astartes war gear, including ancient Space Marine Legion war machines. They maintain a large array of tanks, transports, and dreadnoughts. However, their reliance on solid endurance and dependable infantry often means they field fewer rapid reaction units compared to other chapters, leading to a relatively rarer deployment of fast-moving stuff like bikes and land speeders. The Salamanders adhere to many of the organisational tenets of the Codex Astartes, like many Space Marine chapters, but they also retain some unique structures that reflect their legacy as a legion. The Salamanders wear green armour, a hue that has varied from deep dark green to jade to bright emerald over the millennia. Their primary chapter icon is the stylized skull of the salamander, and their heraldry frequently features flame, hammer, and drake icons, central to their beliefs. In addition to these, Battle Brothers bear brands of honor, and many celebrated heroes wear cloaks and mantlets forged from drake skin. Individual squads often adapt common motifs from chapter lore, from Nocturnian myths, or from the Codex Astartes for their squad markings, commemorating victories, honouring the fallen, or celebrating bonds forged with allies. Broadly, the Salamanders chapter follows the Codex Astartes in squad organisation, but their overall structure is a bit different. Unlike most Codex-compliant chapters, they're organised into 7 companies rather than 10. Each of these companies is slightly oversized, comprising 12 squads instead of 10, a design choice to better withstand the additional pressures the chapter often face in war. The 7-company structure is a direct throwback to the original organisation of the Salamanders Legion, which Vulkan divided into 7 great houses to honour the ancient tribes of Nocturne. To this day, each of the 7 companies maintains ceremonial ties to a specific sanctuary city and keeps their barracks within that city. Not only does that arrangement foster a direct connection between the chapter and the people, it also cultivates a certain amount of competition amongst the companies, pushing Battle Brothers to greater heights of achievement while instilling the humility and understanding that the chapter are known for. The command structure of the Salamanders was formalised after Vulkan's disappearance. The captain of the first company holds the ceremonial honorific of Regent of Prometheus and serves as the chapter master. This title reflects the Salamanders' belief that Vulkan will one day return, and the chapter master is merely a steward until then. Their wider ruling body is called the Promethean Council, comprised of the 7 company captains and other high-ranking officers. This council directs the chapter, organises strike forces, and appoints senior leaders like the Forge Father. Although councillors often speak freely, the chapter master is the one to make all final decisions. Though in recent years, due to the Great Rift's disruptions, full council gatherings have become quite rare, leading the current chapter master to a more solitary rule, often with his first company lieutenants assuming broader command. That first company are known as the Fire Drakes, and they embody the chapter's soul and comprise its most experienced and accomplished warriors. They're seen as exemplars of what it means to be a son of Vulkan, not just for their lethality in combat, but also for their profound wisdom, stoic endurance, and deep reserves of strength. The Fire Drakes are a tempered mix of veteran units, but the chapter maintains an unusually large store of tactical dreadnought armour, making Terminator squads very common, wading through firestorms, swinging their immense thunderhammers, like the original Fire Drakes in Vulkan's bodyguard. Unique amongst all the companies, the Fire Drakes do not maintain any barracks on Nocturne, but dwell solely in the fortress monastery on Prometheus, descending to the planet only for important rituals. This position means they play an active role in chapter command, directing training and coordinating security, thus honing their leadership skills. They're highly valued for their tactical advice when they're attached to larger strike forces, and this all prepares them for their future roles as veteran sergeants, officers, or masters of Salamanders' warships. The company commander is Chapter Master Tushan, bearing the title Regent of Prometheus. He's responsible for ensuring Vulkan's legacy endures, and the Fire Drakes serve as his honour guard and as his equerries, presenting the chapter at its best to anyone who might visit Prometheus. Also, nominally part of the first company is the Forge Father, currently Vulkan Hestan. Any Forge Father must possess a versatile strategic mind, unassailable determination, and immense resilience to endure a quest that may last their entire life. Hestan was formerly the captain of the 4th Company, and he cast off his forename to proudly bear Vulkan's name as part of the rituals. Guided by clues in the Tome of Fire, he actively searches for the 4 remaining artifacts, however difficult that might be since the spread of the Great Rift, and his duties allow him to requisition forces and assets from across the chapter. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th companies are designated battle companies, the primary fighting component of the chapter. The 2nd company are known as the Defenders of Nocturne. They're perhaps the most widely recognised symbol of the Salamanders chapter due to their profound commitment to protecting the weak and their their selfless heroism. While detractors might scorn their focus on saving civilians, the second company views their actions pragmatically, ensuring the survival of vital skills needed to allow the Imperium to continue. Under their commander, Nkelm, the Master of the Watch, the defenders of Nocturne operate in a remarkably open manner. They're often the first chapter to extend diplomatic overtures, and unlike others who fight on their own terms, the second company readily cooperates with other Imperial forces, amplifying their allies' abilities by understanding how best to utilize the assets. A notable example is the war in the Karsis sector, where Captain Nkelm healed the rift between the various Astra Militarum regiments and the tech priests of Mars. The third company, known as the Pyroclasts, is a battle company that lives up to that epithet as fiery angels of death, excelling in purging the enemy with flame. This title is inherited from the old Salamanders Legion, where the Pyroclasts were the 18th Legion's destroyer corps. Unlike other Legion destroyer corps, they focused exclusively on flame-based weapons, as Vulkan saw fire as a means of purifying and renewing, rather than just tainting the ground, as many other destroyer-grade weapons did. Commanded by Captain Adrax Agatoni, the Pyroclasts are superbly equipped for frontline siegecraft, boarding actions, and hive cleansings. They use searing waves of fire to scour garrisons. They're also adept at using subtle flame to tactically corral enemies. They're also unyielding towards cowards and sluggards, and their retribution in those cases is ruthless. Since the opening of the Great Rift, their skills have been in high demand for purging chaos cults, sfected forge worlds, and Xenos infestations. While adhering to the Promethean cult's teachings of protecting the weak, they also embody Vulkan's pragmatism, understanding that innocent lives must sometimes fall for the Imperium's greater good, and that heavy burden stays with them, leading to a shared sorrow amongst all Salamanders veterans who serve with the Pyroclasts. Captain Agatoni is quite a unique figure, considered by some to be the most akin to Vulkan of any Salamander in centuries due to his stability, consideration, and relentless ferocity once roused. A Primaris Space Marine, his merciless pragmatism is evident in a very simple creed: whatever must be done for the Imperium's good, no matter how callous, he will see it through. He possesses an unshakable moral certitude, but Agatoni is also vigilant that this way of thinking is not perverted like it so often has been, swearing that the third company will never become tools of tyrants. The fourth company, known as the Branded, often serves as the first battle company new Salamanders will experience. Assignment to this company signifies recognition of a battle brother's expertise and the chapter's faith in their abilities. The ceremonies that accompany that elevation include a series of binding vows made to the chapter, and those pledges are often seared directly into the warrior's flesh as a permanent expression of their duty, making the taking of oaths an intrinsic aspect of the fourth company's character. They see themselves as the most dedicated to the chapter's Promethean cult, and their ranks are filled with brander priests, chapter serfs who attend to their Astartes masters, burning pledges into their skin with intricately crafted ancient branding irons. These marks record vows to uphold the Promethean cult's values, vanquish specific enemies, or endure trials of mind and body. While Salamanders often instruct their brander priests to mark them before battle, the fourth company also engages in extensive scarification, bordering on an obsession, with some covering almost their entire bodies in brands and scars, save for their face, which is reserved for the first company veterans. Wherever possible, the fourth company's strike forces endeavour to engage the enemy in close assault and short-range firefights so that the warriors of the Branded can be sure of fulfilling the vows upon their skin. Predictably, the fourth company maintains especially close links with the chapter's Reclusiam. The fifth company, known as the Drake Hunters, is one of the Salamander's two reserve companies. Their vital responsibility is to reinforce the strike forces of the three battle companies, not through logistical transfers of personnel per se, but through the direct support of battle company actions across the galaxy. They fight in a mix of battle line and fire support roles, engaging foes both at mid-range and long range. As the final rite of their induction, all Salamander's Marines must hunt and slay one of Nocturne's deadly reptilian salamanders. The Drake Hunters elevate this practice to an art form, viewing the striding war engines and hulking alien horrors of the battlefield as an extension of those youthful hunts. Rather than static defense, 5th Company Salamanders advance alongside battle tanks and weapons platforms dedicated to tracking down their mighty prey. Their current commander, Captain Mulkabar, also the Master of Rites, has furthered the Drake Hunters' reputation for fearlessness. Grim and remorseless, his strategic vocabulary has little room for subterfuge siege or infiltration, and he leads his warriors steadily into the open furnace of battle, bearing down on prey with calculated intimidation. The 6th company, known as the Flamehammers, is the other reserve company. While tempered by a patient sort of wisdom, Salamanders are also capable of sudden, shocking assaults, and the Flamehammers are there to temper the chapter's warriors, many of whom are newly raised from the Scout Battalion. Comprising a large number of fire support squads and several battle line squads, the Flamehammers regularly speed into battle in fast-moving transport vehicles or descend into the thick of fighting in drop pods. This channels those headstrong desires for immediate action, while their war gear and support responsibilities reinforce the need for restraint and calm. They're commanded by Captain Nea Urvan, the chapter's master of relics. And finally, the 7th company, known as the Sons of Nocturne, serve as the chapter's scout company. Their missions include infiltration, intelligence gathering, and assassination operations, but their actions are often placed to ensure that the often smaller numbers of salamanders deployed to a theatre are not pitted against unknown foes, maximising the strength of the main force. The 7th Company includes 12 squads of Vanguard Space Marines, experienced warriors in various patterns of Mark X Phobos armor who cause disruption to neutralize enemy long-range firepower. The remaining warriors are neophytes in either scout squads or scout bike squads, typically attached to larger strike forces under experienced sergeants. They are commanded by the Master of Recruits, Captain Solbarkan. He oversees neophyte maturation into fully fledged Adeptus Astartes, and he makes the final decision on a neophyte's progression to full implantation. The chapter's exacting standards and its relatively slow induction process, largely due to his meticulous assessment, ensure that salamanders who do eventually don power armor are exemplars of the chapter. In recent millennia, the Salamanders chapter has remained highly active throughout the Imperium and have engaged in numerous significant conflicts. All 7 of the Salamanders companies mustered to defend the cardinal world of Phaistos and the imperiled Osiris sector. This battle became a mythical event due to its scale and impact. On the planet, orc waves relentlessly broke against the well-prepared defences of the Salamanders, and in orbit, the fleet fiercely engaged the Greenskins' Space Hulk flotilla with aggressive Terminator boarding actions. A final decisive tactical maneuver involved flooding the course of the main orc assault on Phaistos with Prometheum, which was then set alight as the Salamanders launched their counterattack. The resulting flames were so immense they could be seen from space. The Salamanders also joined several other chapters in the Badab War to halt the depredations of the renegade Astral Claws and their secessionist allies. Despite being few in number, their contributions to the conflict were considerable. The Salamanders arrived in 906 M41 in the Maelstrom Zone, though they were initially reluctant to deploy, having fought alongside both the Firehawks and the Astral Claws in recent memory. But when it was found that Huron's forces had turned away from the Imperium, they agreed to the Inquisition's requests, deploying the 2nd Company, supported by elements of many other companies under the command of the then 2nd Company captain, Pelas Mirsan. The chapter fought in most major battles of the war, including the invasion of Sagan, the suppression of Galen, and the siege of Decebalus. They were also instrumental in the rehabilitation of the Executioners chapter during the events of the Red Hour, in which the Salamander's ship, Pyre of Glory, was boarded by Astral Claws and Executioners forces. Desperate to increase their numbers, the Astral Claws attempted to steal gene seed reserves from the Salamander's ship, an act considered so dishonourable that the Executioners turned on their allies and left the secessionist cause. The Executioners were then pursued across the southern Maelstrom Zone by loyalists, including by the Minotaurs chapter, but it was the Salamanders interposing their ships in the resulting conflict that spared the Executioners' execution, and in fact brought them back into the loyalist fold with relatively lenient penalties. The Salamanders have also repeatedly deployed into the wars on Armageddon. The Salamanders first came to the planet in response to a cry for aid from Commissar Yarrick, not from the planet's governor, during the Second Armageddon War against the vast War led by the Gothorc warlord Gazikal Thraka. By the time Chapter Master Tushan led a strike force containing elements of the 1st, 2nd, and 5th companies to Armageddon, the planet's defenders were in disarray. Hive Infernus had fallen, and Hive Hades barely held on. Tushan quickly assessed the strategic situation and deployed his forces where they could do the most good. While other Imperial forces engaged the main Orc thrusts, Tushan led his warriors to stabilise defences along the Stygies River. Using gunships and armoured transports, the Salamanders repeatedly relocated their forces to bolster Imperial lines wherever they were wavering, aiding the Steel Legion forces and throwing the Orcs back. As the Salamanders' casualties mounted, their renown swelled amongst the Imperial soldiery. Their proudest moment came when Tushan and his fire drakes held the Martyrs' Bridge for 4 days and nights against a vast Orc horde, and they fought in the final battle of the war alongside Commander Dante and his Blood Angels to break the war for good. However, the war-torn Armageddon never really recovered, constantly battling a lower-level greenskin threat, and all too soon, Ghazghkull Thraka returned, leading a war that dwarfed his previous invasion. Despite heavy chapter commitments across multiple war zones, Chapter Master Tushan committed a force equal to 3.5 companies. In this third war, the Salamanders purged Orc forces in the equatorial jungles, fought alongside the Black Templars in the defence of Hell's Reach Hive, and Tushan and his warriors boarded the Orc rocks that had landed on the Hemlock River with Terminators and Assault Centurions, reducing them to blazing husks. They also protected refugee camps, escorted relief convoys, and safeguarded Medicae facilities, shielding Armageddon's people from the beast's wrath, while other Imperial forces pursued final victory over Ghazghkull. And then, since the spread of the Rift, various companies of the Salamanders have found themselves attempting to protect humanity across a wider front than ever, often against the demonic forces of chaos. On the vital agri-world of Ibranis, they fought the Death Guard's 4th Plague Company, under their Gestalt demon overlord, the Eater of Lives. The Death Guard's ships carried thousands of vials containing the Eater Plague, aiming to infect the Imperium's vast supply chain. The Salamanders made planetfall on Ibranis Primus, targeting the Death Guard that infested the mobile feed processing cities. They discovered remnants of Legio Ignis Titans trying to engage the Death Guard in open battle, but the heretic Astartes had entrenched themselves within the cities, tormenting the Titans with waves of demons. The Salamanders engaged in savage, short-range firefights within the processing cities, but neither side yielded, and the once verdant plains were transformed into black mires by Nurglite plagues and then salamander flames. After 3 grueling months, the Salamanders finally began to gain ground as ash blizzards formed from the infernos they had lit, and little life was left. The Death Guard eventually abandoned the planet through a rent in reality, but after the Death Guard retreated, Salamander's scouts discovered more vials of the plague on shipments leaving the system, and realizing the enormity of the threat, they dedicated themselves to purging the rest of the taint. They fought the Death Guard again, a war Salask, targeting key Chaos Cult strongholds and reducing their coordination so that the local PDF and RBTs could finally engage them and stop the spread. And on Lagos, they responded to astropathic distress calls in force, battling the bloodthirster Khazul and his Khornate legions in dozens of simultaneous engagements across the system. Though the Salamanders suffered serious losses, the Battle Brothers continued to fight methodically from hive to hive, planet to planet, systematically burning Khorne's minions away, and finally confronted the Bloodthirster, where Tushan, his fire drakes, and his remaining librarians smote the creature's form and cast its spirit back to Khorne. Despite this history of sacrifice, the Salamanders chapter stands as strong as ever in the 41st millennium. They eagerly received the knowledge and equipment required to manufacture Primaris Space Marines, finally increasing their ability to manufacture new warriors. A number of Primaris Space Marines have already advanced into the elite First Company and earned their place, and many of their commanders, notably Captain Adrax Agatoni, commander of the Third Company, have undergone the Rubicon Primaris, embracing the option for augmented physiology. Despite the profound disruptions of the Great Rift, their own tendency to overcommit themselves to any battle they find worthy, and 10 millennia of conflict, the Salamanders continue to embody the qualities of their Primarch, his unwavering dedication to humanity, his craftsmanship, and his unique bond with fire and the forge. And who knows, technically, Vulkan is one of the Primarchs that is still out there, missing since the War of the Beast. If they can surmount the obvious issues of the Great Rift and find those final 4 artifacts, maybe another Primarch could be returned to the service of the Imperium. The Salamanders are an interesting chapter. They were first introduced for the Badab War in this fetching camo scheme back in 1989. You can see a variant on the cover of this old Battle for Armageddon board game. But then, while often appearing in the general lists of Space Marine chapters, they basically take 2nd edition off. They're kind of reintroduced into the game during 3rd edition, especially for Codex Armageddon in 2000, and then for an Index Astartes article in White Dwarf 274 in 2002. By this point, they are green, not stripy yellow, and most of the general lore about Nocturne and Vulkan is first described in these articles, but the rest about the 9 artifacts and the various companies, and even the fact that they're more concerned with the general people of the Imperium than most Space Marines, doesn't start being added until 5th edition 40k, in the late 2000s, when there was more of an attempt to bring to the fore all the first founding chapters and show how different they are. It's also notable that 5th edition is when they were first depicted as having charcoal black skin and red eyes. Up until this point, basically nothing was ever stated about their skin, but since about 2000, they'd been depicted by Games Workshop as looking like, well, how we'd use the word black today, like people from sub-Saharan Africa. I could probably do a whole video on Games Workshop's historical caginess about the races of their models, but for whatever reason, in 2005, they decided that instead of just being dark-skinned, the Salamanders would now all have burning eyes and charcoal skin like lava people, because, you know, radiation or something. Possibly as a lovely counterpoint to the fact that they're the nicest chapter, but also because the races of their models was a conversation Games Workshop really wanted to avoid in the 2000s. Anyway, that nicest chapter thing is really the interesting stuff here, because of course no one in 40k is nice. They're only the nice chapter by 40k standards. The Salamanders are still more than happy to exterminate whole populations by burning them to death if they think it's necessary. They're still Space Marines. It's just very Warhammer to make the chapter, who are apparently the most compassionate, specialize in the use of warcrime weapons. Anyway, that's the Salamanders for you, burning their way through the rebellious masses of the 41st millennium and somehow coming out of it as the good guys. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear more about the many factions of Warhammer 40k, there's probably a video that's going to pop up to the right there. And if you'd like to support the channel, well, we've got a membership scheme and a Patreon and a merch store, and of course, you can like and subscribe. See ya!